This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. This one's kind of interesting. So there was some big news that broke recently in the wholesale distributor realm that actually could have like kind of a ripple effect. So kind of a follow-up to our last episode. Basically, this episode's going to be covering changes in distro and what that means for you, what the impact could be, what our thoughts are, etc. So the big news, for those of you that don't know, Beckett, the parent company of Beckett, who also owns Dragon Shield, it was announced and made official, acquired Southern Hobby Distribution. So there is actually a distributor owned by Beckett now, and this is going to be kind of a big deal. So without further ado, let's get started.
So what I kind of forgot about Beckett until we talked prior to the show was for the longest time they were the premier periodical for sports cards pricing. You had your Beckett essentially grading magazine, and there were some articles that primarily did pricing, and then eventually the BGS system came out and they became, premier in that area. And to me, it's really interesting that a parent company that owns Dragon Shields and Beckett would also buy a distributor. Now, Southern, for me, lives up to its name. It's Southern Hobby, and it provides product for the hobbyist, be it a game player or a comic collector. They also do sports distro or sports card distro?
Yes, so They do sports card distro as well. The sports card world, as anyone that's been reading the news, is exploding right now, and it's very different. The model for sports cards is drastically different than the model for Magic. So Magic comes in and you have your wholesale price. It's always going to be your wholesale price. That's the price as long as it's in print.
Yep.
It's not the case with sports cards. And this is kind of important because the way it works with sports cards is you're allotted a certain amount at wholesale. Beyond that, the distro can charge a market rate. So that's something that's going to be very interesting, seeing how Wizards has started to get more and more into these chase sets, is seeing crossover between the business models in sports and in Magic.
Yep.
The Secret Lair series is incredibly popular, and Topps has had Project 70 for about 5 years now, which is literally the same exact thing, except with individual players instead of, fetch lands or shock lands.
Yep.
And then Magic adopts this drop model. So I wouldn't actually be at all surprised, and this is something that Magic has kind of done already anyways at distros, is, you can get out-of-print stuff that's returned when a company goes out of business or something. Some Southern warehouses literally are still sitting on World Wake boxes that you can buy. Not first-run World Wake, unfortunately, but World Wake boxes that you can buy for basically what market rate is. So they deal, Southern deals with sports cards. Yes, and I expect to see a larger amount of sports cards start to funnel through them at this point.
So they're not necessarily a market leader as a distro for sports cards.
No, especially because Panini has taken a direct-to-consumer model, which they won't be around past 2025 anyways, because all of the exclusive sports rights went to a new company.
Yep.
But Panini itself, who is the largest manufacturer of sports cards, they do football, they do UFC, they do any of the fringe sports as well, NASCAR, that kind of stuff. They do direct to consumer. So you go to their website and you buy hobby boxes there in addition to what's allotted at distro.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting model, and I think that'll be very unique to see how Southern changes things.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that this buyout happens and something doesn't change at Southern in my mind.
Absolutely. And I know there are dedicated comic distros, that's kind of their avenue, that's all they do. Do you know if there are any distros dedicated just to sports cards?
So there's some smaller ones that have started up just over the last couple of years that are part of the sports card boom, that are dedicated primarily to sports cards, but they aren't large scale by any means.
Okay.
They're not, your GTS, your Southern Hobby, your Alliance, your Diamond.
Yep.
They're not any of the big ones.
Okay. Okay, so like that, like I said, this is kind of opaque to me because I've never put in orders. All I hear about from Distro is just my time, in the industry working at various entities. We mentioned Diamond not too long ago, and they're right now on the way out.
Yeah, they filed for restructuring bankruptcy, and they're primarily comics, so they're kind of outside the purview. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, because Marvel went for a direct to consumer route, so
Okay,
it'll be interesting.
yeah, comics always have their own interesting like way of doing things because you have a million variant covers depending on what you're ordering, where it's going, if it's a con, if it's some sync release with the IP and some other amalgamation, be it like a toy line or whatever. And I was always very curious to know how dedicated comic distros kind of survived, because your subscription model is what gets you through at the LGS level. Your people that just come in and dedicated every week buy some amount of comics. Your subscriptions should, in theory, as a comic store, pay your rent. Like that.
That's the belief, yes.
That's how you know you're going to do well, is when your subscriptions can pay your rent. And I was always impressed at that, especially when you had other entities in this space like large bookstores, which we have lost some as time went on. But we're also now at an age where every like drugstore is no longer selling comics like they were in the 90s. We've lost a lot of newsstands, and so the direct model makes sense. The loss of distro is kind of, I guess, to me, expected, because I really still don't know how the comics industry survives. It just
print media is dying everywhere, so
it just seems passe at this point, aside from people who dedicated want the books because like it goes with the rest of the run that they've been collecting for forever. Then sure. What happens to Diamond and Dime is going to be super duper interesting for me, mainly because the managers, one of my LGSs, they are above the comic store that is owned by the same person.
Oh,
so
okay, fair.
I get to hear a little bit back and forth. And then something else is, Flesh and Blood has a really interesting, I'm going to say distro model, but I don't mean through distributor. I just mean an actual model of distributing their product. And we just got wind of a premium store program.
Yeah, so their Flesh and Blood is doing a thing now where their premium store program, you have to sign up for it, like WPN Premium.
Yep.
It's the only way to get first edition, which, if you know anything about Flesh and Blood, is where 99.99999% of the money is.
Yep.
Now, this is another thing that's changing at distribution because, basically we were told, hey, you're going to get some first edition boxes of the next set. Great, awesome. Then we're told, oh, wait, you didn't sign up for their in-store program. Oh, so now we're not getting first edition boxes.
That's shit.
And the reason this is interesting is because Flesh and Blood is, of any game that's come out of the last 10 years, Flesh and Blood seems to have the most staying power.
Yes, yeah.
It came out during COVID and exploded thanks to a couple of YouTube channels and kept with it. And LSV and Channel and everyone started trying to push this game out there. And now there's constructed play happening, and the game is good. And this is the first time that I can remember legitimate hype, legitimate financial backing, and legitimate, like, changing winds almost, like a changing of the guard in terms of popular card games since Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Magic became the big three in the 90s and 2000s. And them going towards this model, I think, is important to watch, because the better this model gets, the more successful it is, the more I would expect Wizards to lean into the WPN Premium program, because they're already doing that.
Yeah.
The ampersand promos were exclusive to WPN Premium. You couldn't get them if you were just a Joe Schmo LGS. Fine. But if they start to do product distribution like that, that is enormous and a huge impact on the game. If it gets to be, similar to the Secret Lair program, the premium one where you sign up and you get the, special layers that are only for members of that program. Getting more exclusive with this stuff is getting more and more popular in the industry. And if that continues with Magic, and all of a sudden we've got like a Modern Masters 5 or whatever we're on now that's exclusive to WPN Premium stores, that puts a lot of pressure on the LGS model and a lot of pressure on the financial aspects of the game. So it's something that I think is worth paying attention to as a Magic vendor even.
Yep.
Because wanting to get ahead of this kind of thing is one of the only ways that you can survive in the industry.
Yep.
You've got to be first, be better, or cheat, and you can't really cheat. So you got to be first or be better. It's easier to be first. So pay attention to that stuff.
It's kind of ironic. I was talking to my wife about it this weekend. We have another local LGS that's looking to set up a second location about 2 hours away geographically in like the middle of the state. They want to be the only WPN premium store in state. And I was talking to her, I said, at this point in time, with no clear path to a professional scene and no good idea of what organized play is looking like, it's almost hubris. That statement, we want to be the only WPN premium store in state, seems like hubris for here. You know, multiple states have multiple WPN premium stores. It's not that difficult to do. It requires a lot of effort. You have to go above and beyond by a lot. You have to host events that regularly meet or exceed their attendance caps. You can't just rely on pre-releases anymore like you were able to with the advent of the PPTQ system. That kind of cut the feet out of a lot of old WPN premium stores because they could no longer hold PTQs and get those counts. GPTs for buys, you used to be able to essentially cap that. No longer there. It's gone. So if for WotC to push product to WPN Premium, but at the same time not give players a reason to come out and play, is like kind of a shyster move.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people right now are taking the time to comb through every article WotC puts out where they mention WPN Premium to see what are these example stores doing that are currently labeled as premium. What can we do in these times that makes sense both for our players and financially for our store?
Yeah, so Moonbase was the first premium store in Missouri and one of the first in the country, and the burdens that those stores have are actually significant. You can't use your 8-foot plastic tables that you've been using for years. You need something else. You need to have your floors a certain way. You need to have your displays a certain way. There's no cardboard boxes anywhere unless it's a sealed box, you know. And then you get secret shopped on top of that.
Yes,
so there's a lot that goes into the program, and I think that the more that they incentivize going that route, the more you're going to see the traditional LGS, like we touched on a few episodes ago, have to go down multiple venues now. You can't just do Magic and comics anymore. You've got to become like a family hobby store in order to make ends meet. And that's fine. That's just a change that's coming to the industry to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it will definitely shape, especially if Flesh and Blood, keeps up. You mentioned a lot of games have popped up. Not a lot of them had staying power, and not a lot of them could really put pressure on the LGS to do anything. The only other company I've known besides WotC to put pressure on both the LGS and on-prem vendors is Konami. And Konami sets a dress code for vendors at their events, and Konami sets a price ceiling for individual cards at their events. And if you don't play, Konami will make sure you do not get product.
Yep.
You will just not get product from Distro. And that can definitely tank a store, that especially if they're relying on Yu-Gi-Oh sales or like an online vendor. Absolutely. Just to have that vertical disappear, essentially. And it's, like you said, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Similar for Pokemon. I don't think they do first edition anymore, but if they went back to it, or they did those rainbow foils, etc., I can imagine that just being a trendsetter. And overall, stuff like this, distro changes ripple through the industry.
It really does, and especially, when you have someone who is not necessarily a primary vendor in the space, but has a massive impact on the space. And the really interesting thing that's probably going to impact players the most is the availability of Dragon Shields is going to be affected by this, I would have to assume, because they're only going to come through one distributor now, because why wouldn't they?
But it's not like
it's not like
stores don't order from Southern.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all of a sudden, all of the Dragon Shields where Southern may be out and you could get some from GTS or Alliance.
Yep.
Now you've got to hope Southern has them. And don't know if anybody's been paying attention. Sleeves are kind of hard to come by right now because plastic is still impossible to find.
Yep.
So, but yeah, I think it's really important because stuff like this often does fly under the radar to the layman. And I think that these types of changes have such a huge impact on what happens behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. It may not seem like it, but all of a sudden, okay, we have more financing behind this. This can impact prices.
Yeah.
This can impact availability. This can have a huge influence because Beckett is such a large entity within the hobby industry in general, if not Magic. Mm-hmm. Although obviously people like BGS cards. So their slabs matter.
Absolutely. And what'll happen when they pump more money through Southern is also intriguing to me. It's not like they're going to be able to vacuum up that much more product, but the ability for exclusivity, etc., kind of happens from there when you can offer people more money for their deals. Though something that I don't think a lot of people realize that might be interesting is, so the premium store model for Flesh and Blood, right? If that's coming from Distro Direct to LGS, what happens when that product doesn't sell at the LGS for whatever reason? It's tough to sell. Maybe the LGS just can't sell Flesh and Blood. It goes back to Distro and then goes up for reorder or re-up.
And I think if anyone here has ever been to a distro, one of the best things to do, at least for me, I love this, go through the damaged area. Because it's stuff that basically was shipped out to someone and they said, hey, this box is damaged. I'm sending it back. I need you to replace it. Mm. And that's, when this stuff doesn't sell at distro, a lot of times it gets sold back.
Yep.
And sometimes it may not, they may buy it at a fraction of the cost, or sometimes they'll pay wholesale back, basically. It just depends on what product it is, what the distro's contract is, stuff like that. But if all of a sudden this gets back to distro and distro's contract is, hey, we can only sell it to Flesh and Blood Premium, well, then it's really restricted because you don't have the option anymore of going to just Joe Blow and his LGS that's just down the street that just opened like a month ago.
Yep.
So it's going to be very interesting to see, because I think that this potentially, of any of the changes, including Beckett buying out Southern, has the potential to have a large-scale impact on the way that Magic is distributed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, it's not like Flesh and Blood product has been super limited overall. Like you mentioned, it's really the first edition that's kind of the bottleneck and the financial vehicle right now. They're currently active. I think 2 cards were banned today. Maybe it was just one, unrelated to the event that just happened. I believe they just saw something off the chart, so they're taking action, immediately. I don't think it'll, it's great. I don't think it'll turn into the Versus system where everything just becomes ridiculous until you release a Titan set and crush your game. But like something we probably,
I loved that game.
Something we won't see, I'm hoping, for years to come is the return of sets, Flesh and Blood, be it first edition or regular, back to distro because it didn't sell. So distro now has to eat it, sit there, and it sits awaiting a fire sale buy.
Yeah. And I hope that doesn't happen with Magic, because one of the most important things with this, especially over the last year, has been the availability of sealed product.
Yep.
And we're kind of in this weird, as we've touched on, the last year is kind of unique because of the production issues, because prior to that, sitting on sealed wasn't necessarily a good investment, but all of a sudden here we are. And I think Magic is better financially and play wise when that is the case. Yep. And I would like for that to not go away.
Yeah. And is Southern the distro that has the eBay storefront and now the individual buyer portal?
Yes, yeah. I believe so.
I'm curious if that is impacted at all.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see as well. I know they have the individual buyer portal. I don't know if they have the eBay store or not. Well, but they definitely have an individual.
Yeah, it started at one place and then they moved to the website so they could go Distro Direct.
They
built the rep on eBay just to make sure it'll work out. Now they go Distro Direct, and I imagine the parent org wouldn't stop it. Maybe pump a little more through, especially if they know they're competing against Amazon.
Yeah.
If they can't push boxes to the LGS because the LGS is losing to Amazon, well, now the distro competition is actually Amazon, and you've got to start pumping out product.
Yeah, you're not beating them, unfortunately.
No, but their margins should be about the same as Amazon in theory if they're moving the quantity they expect to.
True.
And I know they do their sales every now and again, so I'm kind of curious if anything changes about that, if any offering changes in that regard. And as far as I know, because I don't really know anybody else that buys card games in the quantity that Magic players do, if Southern has similar direct-to-consumer models for other card games. So be it Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever people are playing, Digimon.
Yeah, not as far as I know. There's no other direct-to-consumer. I think they might be doing it with Weiss Schwartz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That game is a little more that's a little more direct to consumer because people buy the anime they like, so it's very difficult for an LGS to hold stock in something. It's like if your LGS did Gundam models for whatever reason, because they're super complex, and like it's like the guy that builds naval ship models. They're really involved, but not everybody likes the same thing, and there's so many different items that you can buy. It's just easier for your customer to come in, essentially look at the catalog and say, I want these, and then the store just order those. So
yeah.
Wives is very much like that because people are going to buy what they like. Not everybody's into sword art. Some people are going to be into like whatever else they have on that IP.
Ghost in the Shell or Persona series was super popular.
Yeah.
But,
the only one I can remember is SOA because we always have SOA, but the other ones that sell super well are like the first 4 sets that were released, and I can never remember what they are.
Yeah.
It's been too long since I worked Anime Boston. It's the only time.
Soon.
Yeah, I know. It's TM. It's the only time I see that game.
Yeah.
But as far as distro is concerned, like I think a lot of this is pretty positive, even if the Flesh and Blood thing is kind of not squirrely but unique in a way, like.
Yeah.
And maybe forces WotC's hand if it continues to operate like they are. Like,
I think that's going to be the big thing. Is this is the type of thing that along with Flesh and Blood's popularity, if this also is popular, Wizards seems to be they're not under Hasbro's management anymore. They're an independent company. Their CEO used to work for Hasbro. I don't know. They're basically under Hasbro's management, whatever they want to say. Now that they're in that mode, it seems like they're a lot more willing to modify their business model to what works, which is, I think, good because for a long time, Magic was stuck in its ways. WotC wasn't changing things, although it almost seems like they've gone too far in the opposite direction with organized play, where every 6 months there's a change, but we've harped on that before.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
All
in all, I think it's all good looks. I think everything's. I mean, aside from Diamond filing for 11, I think the rest of it's pretty positive. But like I said, at the same time, I really don't know what floats the physical comic industry anymore. So it's like, it's terrible that a company's going to go out, people are going to lose jobs, but.
Yeah.
At the same time, as far as the industry is concerned, I think it's just another blip. I don't think it's really that impactful.
No.
Picks?
Let's do it. Right. I went first last week. You're first this week.
So I'm going to take my Longshot pick for the year. I'm using it now. Ooh. Way late.
Ooh.
Yep. So my Longshot pick is Domini Raid. And for those of you that don't know, this is a Planeswalker originally released in Gatecrash. The +1 is like the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. So cool, it's an advantage engine. The -2 doesn't matter, it's just a fight, but the emblem is also important. So -7, you get an emblem with creatures you control have haste, or have double strike, trample, hexproof, and haste, right? So when you look at this card, it does a lot of good things for 3 mana. It's only a 3 loyalty planeswalker, so it takes a while to get the ultimate, but because it drops early, you can kind of get ahead, right? So right now, CK is buying 22 at $1. There's 225 LP or better for $2.39 on TCG at the moment. That's not a big difference from what the stats were when I added this to my list in January of this year. So January 19th, 2021, Card Kingdom was buying 30 at $1.35, so they were buying more for more. They're currently buying less for less, and there was 196 on TCG for $2.33. So that number is basically the same, right? So why am I picking this? So this is highly playable in strategies really that are creature based and also base Gruul. It's an incredible value engine that can help close out games as another threat. That plus is really good. It just helps you churn through. And Gruul-based decks are generally creature-centric, so much like Lurking Predators, this should have a lot more hits than it's going to have misses. So within the format itself, originally it was a value card in what I like to call heavy punch decks, just big green or big red-green dummies. These decks, or this card rather, these strategies allow you to play through the mid to the late game at removal heavy tables because it's just going to keep refilling, Like I said, every Domini Raid activation should be a hit. And with the increase of power level of green creatures, Domini fell out of favor as an advantage engine, but as we continue to receive support for lower power level tribes like werewolves and dinosaurs, Domini becomes a really good look. It's also a lot cheaper than a combination of cards like Xenagos God of Revels with Concordant Crossroads with Sylvan Library, and that allows those on a budget to stretch that budget a lot further. And that's why I wanted to harp on both the +1 and the emblem, because those two combined, like I said, cut down a lot on the financial burden of what you need to be doing with these decks to be super competitive. If you're going to be able to get, haste and trample out of the emblem, then Xenagos God of Revels and Concordant Crossroads are kind of out of the equation. If your +1 is going to hit a lot more often than it's going to miss, then that kind of takes care of Sylvan Library, right? And so this becomes a really good value engine for these really low power tribes. And that's why I'm looking at Domini Raid now. So Domini's been flat for several years, and I'll bring up stocks because it's just really freaking laughable. So after rotation, Domini actually held at about 7, increased upwards towards 9, and then just cratered after the Modern Masters 2017 release, just straight down to about $2.80, which is where we are, or $2.39, which is about where we are right now. There's also a secret layer variant. That didn't really impact the price, and the Modern Masters didn't really. It impacted it negatively because it fell, but after that it just roped it. It didn't just crater to dust. It's just kind of plateaued, and at that time demand has been pretty steadily low as well. So again, this looks like a long shot spec that has great upside as we just moved into Innistrad with actual werewolf support, and as we received vampire support in Midnight Hunt, I expect continued werewolf support in Crimson Vow, and this should push more people to move in on the tribe and look at or 4 cards that help power up the theme. So, we'll pop over to Rec real quick because I haven't brought this up for the card. And the number 3 general for this is Ulrich, the only legendary werewolf general that we have access to now. And then you see Xenagos God of Revels and some other, like I said, heavy punch style cards, right? So I expect these next 2 sets to really kind of put eyes on this and push it. I believe this is a very slow burn, and we might not see profit to buy this within 12 calendar months, but you should be able to trade this out pretty easily in the coming months at or just above current market value. Essentially, trade bait. Yeah. In the long term, I expect this to be a $5 Planeswalker to have in my binder and be happy with a small stack of these, say somewhere like 16 to 20 overall, to just slowly out over time.
I think cards like Domini Raid, similar to what was the Elf Planeswalker recently that you and I were talking about that I was really high on. 4 mana makes Llanowar Elves.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I gotta pull it up because wasn't from Kaldheim? It was from...
Yeah. It's one of those Planeswalkers that is a continuous source of card advantage for casual players. Casual players love this card. It's incredibly liquid. I actually get asked about it pretty frequently, especially foils at booths, because someone has Mael or Ulrich or something that's just like, I want a bunch of dudes, I want to make dudes, I want to make dudes fight. It's like Don King the deck.
Yep.
It's just making people to fight. And that's such a universal theme for Magic players that you can always count on someone wanting this card.
Yep.
I don't think it's super reprintable. We got the Modern Masters reprint, like you touched on. Like, could they reprint it? Sure. Are they going to?
I checked. I'm pretty sure there are at least 4 or 5 other Domri Planeswalkers.
There are, yeah.
And they had their chance to reprint it in War of the Spark, and they chose not to. Downgraded Domri to, I believe, just a rare.
Yeah.
And made it way poops. The other thing is the name of this Planeswalker is relevant to the history of the game. This is Ollie Raid.
Huh.
One of the a Sylvan Safekeeper is Ollie Raid as the invitational card. Domri Raid is actually also named after Ollie Raid. So it's not like, I don't think they have to go to Ollie and say, hey, we want to use your name again, blah, 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 because they did it in 2017, a number of years after the original Return to Rav set, and again as a secret layer. But it becomes this like tongue-in-cheek reference.
That actually is pretty funny. Yeah. I did not know that.
I was thinking about it. I was like, I thought about Reprint Equity, and I'm like, it's Ollie Raid. They had the opportunity. They made at least 2 dual deck versions, 2 dual deck Domries on top of this, and they just reluctant to put it in a standard set. Could it be in another Master set? Absolutely. I won't disagree with you there. Obviously, it was in Modern Masters 2017 because it's good in the draft environment. It does what you need it to. It hits creatures.
It is. Yeah. I think it's great in the draft environment, but I also think they might be somewhat hesitant to go back to a similar draft environment for a while, just because like the master sets, they've seemed to turn more and more into EDH sets.
Yes, yeah.
Then like we're designing this for limited. It seems more like we're designing this for EDH with a little bit of limited thrown in.
Yep, so. Absolutely. So to speak to Reprint Equity, I think we're fairly low on this one now, outside of a master set, and I just don't think this card gets worse over time.
Yeah, I don't think so either. It's also the fact that it deals with creatures, which seems to be, like we're printing creatures that are so good, Delver doesn't need to run Delver anymore. Yeah. As long as we're doing that, this card's only going to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was trying to think if there would be like a content creator push for this, like, oh, you see it does some great things, does it get a push? And like, even if Domri sits on the table and gets to a point where it's able to emblem, the game is probably over, and the emblem, like, yes, it helps, but I don't think it's going to draw demand. And if you just hit running runners off the pluses, I don't know if it's really going to be attributable, and people are going to be like, oh, Domri Raid won, that game where Saffron Olive played it against, the other 3 on Commander Clash or whatever, right? Or, Jeremy Knoll crushed Star City Commander versus with Domri Raid. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's really going to be a common creator push. I think this is not entirely like feedback loop of EDH rec because it is seen. I think this is more of like, okay, we get new low power, I'll put in quotes, tribes. People start looking at what's being done, and they find Domri Raid as an advantage engine in other low-power tribes or other similar tribes. And I think it's actually going to be the feedback loop that powers this one up, but I think it's also going to be like kind of the expected movement on Domri Raid. I don't think the feedback loop is going to spike this. I think the feedback loop is just going to remind people this is a card, and like, hey, again, I like to bring up foundational stuff, like, this is a card that should always be in consideration for whatever you're doing.
Yeah. If you're in a dude deck, this card should always be in the list in your maybe pile when you're first starting out, because it does dudes really well.
Exactly. When you pull your 150 or 200, whatever it is that you're going to pare down from Domri Raid, should probably be in that pile. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So my pick, speaking of reprint equity, actually GP foil Primeval Titan. So one of the reasons I'm choosing this is because of a card that I called to be banned a long time ago, but does not seem to be going anywhere. So this card is great with lands. The best land maybe ever at this point? Urza Saga. Who knew?
Yeah.
Amulet Titan is starting to show up more and more at locals, at paper events, on Moto. You're seeing people abuse the synergy between Primetime and Dryad of the Elysian Grove and Urza Saga. Like that's of course going to happen forever. And when Urza Saga gets banned, Amulet Titan is still going to be good.
Yep.
So you'll still have viability to this card. So why now? Well, if you take a look at the stocks graph, we're on a little bit of a downturn. Interesting that you can't see TCG low on this graph, which is kind of unfortunate because we're sitting at about $17 low. Now, this is actually up a little bit from about a week and a half ago, but the interesting thing is that if you go to LP and near mint listings on TCG, we are currently sitting at only 36. The reason this price spike has happened is because we are at half what we were a month ago for the Grand Prix promo. But a month ago, it was only $15 low.
Yeah.
So we've had the quantity start to dry up, but we haven't seen the price react in the same way. Now, this card, Primetime can be reprinted a million times. We just got a secret layer that had Primetime in it. Sure. But Grand Prix promos might be gone forever. Yeah. Because Grand Prix just might not be a thing anymore.
Nope, you're right. I'd also like to point out this is one of two pieces of unique art for Primetime. The other one is the secret layer.
Yeah, which is very important as well, because being unique, being foil, being a limited print run, there's a lot of strikes there against reprint and for retaining value.
Yes.
Now, if you remember not a few episodes, about 6 months ago when I was talking about old promos and how those are set to spike, and all of a sudden the star promos took off.
Yep.
All of a sudden your old FNM promos took off. This is part of one of those future waves of promos I expect to take off. I know I picked Una's Blackguard, which has still not taken off, unfortunately, despite getting a rogue set, but this one has an extant archetype already.
Mm-hmm. Two of
it's
them.
only going to get two. It's only going to get better as they print more lands. And the longer Urza's Saga sticks around in any format, the better this card looks.
Yep.
So what am I looking at here timeline-wise? Well, if you take a look at the stocks graph recently, starting earlier this year, actually, we saw a little bit of a spike, and we're on a downturn from that spike where we're going to hit a new floor. So hitting the floor now, what would I expect? Honestly, probably about 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
Soon, TM, when the Star City series comes back and we start getting modern events again, I expect Primetime decks are going to be very good and very high profile.
Yeah.
Urza's Saga will get a lot of camera time. I expect that you'll see more than a few times where Primetime fetches Urza's Saga and Urza's Saga fetches, I don't know, Shadow Spear, Pinning Needle, or Expedition Map, or who knows what. A million different things that it could fetch.
Yep.
And once that happens more and more on camera, more and more exposure, this card's going to start to go up. And I think that the Grand Prix promo will be one of the chase versions of the card that people will try to get as they try to foil out their deck. Particularly when you look at the cost of like some of the non-foil variants, there's really not all that much difference. You're looking at about a $7, $8 difference between a non-foil and a foil in this case, which I think is really important. Star City being the key, though, is kind of the thing to be wary of with the timeline, because I don't expect we'll get a big push for modern constructed events off the gate. I think it'll be standard because that's what they're trying to push on Arena, because that's what moves packs, that's what sells sets. Star City doesn't care about that. They have insane modern buy prices during Legacy season, and they have insane Legacy buy prices during Modern season. I bet we get Modern season first.
Oh, yeah.
So when that happens, I would expect this card to start to take off as we get more eyes and stuff like that. But the other thing is obviously being a promo that we may not get again, there's a collectability to it too. And having that collectability is always a good thing to fall back on, because if there is a little bit of a longer timeline, fine. We've got people that collect promos. Great. Send it to them. You'll be fine.
Yep, absolutely. At first I thought, when you mentioned banning, I thought you were going to talk about the Commander banning and possibly unbanning this, as people move in on Sway the Stars, or moved in, I guess, when everybody's around to this. But no, I like Primetime. I'm a homer for this card. I've been playing it since M10 with Valakut.
Yep.
I've had that deck since then.
I knew it would appeal to you.
Yeah, I put Titan Shift back together. I enjoy playing it. Luckily, I don't have to deal with a lot of Unholy Heat in my local meta, because as one person put it, Unholy Heat makes you embarrassing as a player when you're casting Primetime for 6.
Yeah.
It is not the greatest matchup, but Amulet Titan is so powerful that you can essentially get around and through it. And similarly with Valakut shifting over to Through the Breach, in your opponent's end step, you can through the breach in your first Titan, and then untap, cast the next one and kill him, or through the breach the next one and kill him. And the decks have had to shift from when Modern Horizons 2 first entered the format to deal with Unholy Heat, but it is now in a good. I think these decks are in a good spot to make a competitive comeback. To your point of waiting for the Star City circuit, I also agree, especially with what seems like the death knell of Pioneer and the announcement that it wouldn't be moving to Arena, since the Pioneer Master set has been waylaid indefinitely.
Yep.
And at this point in time, none of the people on my timelines that were playing Pioneer seem to be playing it at all anymore. So there's no reason for Star City to support that format. And with Modern Horizons 2 blowing the doors off and actually bringing people back to that format, I would expect them to run back Standard and Modern. We might get Pioneer in the team events just because it is cheaper than Legacy.
Yeah,
and,
I could see that.
Yeah, so it makes those events more appealing and less gatekeepy, and I'm all for that. I expect Modern to hold a larger premium on the calendar than Pioneer would, and I think it should hold the same or more than Standard. And I'm really excited to see what happens there, and part of that is going to be when cards like this that have just been waiting kind of see the light of day again and take off again with the events that will eventually, be publicized.
Can't wait.
Not at all.
I just want to be at a booth and pay someone too little money for their cards. That's all I want.
We have different goals. I want to be at a table playing Underground Seas again.
God, that's what I really want to be doing. Let's be real. That's what I really want to be doing. I just don't know if it'll happen.
I know. It's a short trip down memory lane because I don't... If Star City ever comes back to the greater New England area, they'll probably put Legacy up here, which is what they do. But Reanimator may not be good, which makes me sad. So
yeah, that's fair.
I'll be happy to possibly play some Legacy again, but be sad I can't play Reanimator. It's just a guilty pleasure of mine. But other than that, for this week, I think I'm all set for distro questions. I'm sure I'll have something afterwards, and I'll be like, I'm a big dummy, I should have asked. But
that's fine.
Yeah, the distro wins are a change in, as we mentioned up top, and it's probably something we'll need to keep an eye on because if one happens, another one's going to happen, and it will matter.
Dominoes fall.
Absolutely. Yep. And with the way Flesh and Blood is working, it will probably have some news from that. I would expect some shakeup from Nintendo in regards to Pokemon and their distro model and their printing, because they've been light for a while, so that'll be interesting to see as well. And other than that, though, I think I'm all set for this week.
Same.
Yep. All right, so we are at MTG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube. You can catch the podcast on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Audible, Stitcher, Spotify. The video version is up on YouTube. If you want to reach us directly, we are at MTG Cabalcast on Twitter, as I just mentioned. I've been pumping out a lot of Bob's Burgers memes, if you've seen those.
Great.
They just speak to me.
That's rightfully so.
Otherwise, I am at Halt. I am Reptar on Twitter, and you are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.